The desert was on fire with late afternoon light, a low orange blaze that made every shadow stretch like a blade. The air trembled with heat, dust lifting off the hardpan ground in little devils that twirled and died. A rider cut across that horizon, tall in the saddle, coat flapping. His name was Eli, though most men never got close enough to use it. He rode as if the land itself obeyed him, a stoic figure marked by dust and silence. His horse, a lean bay, moved in steady rhythm, hoofs cracking against stone like hammer strikes. The silence broke with gunfire, sharp and echoing. 3 shots, then a scream carried ragged by the dry wind. Eli drew up, his eyes narrowing. He had no taste for other folks' troubles, but he had a taste for injustice even less. He turned the bay toward the sound, spurred into a canter that became a gallop, cloak of dust rising behind him. The smell of smoke and gunpowder drifted before the scene came clear. By a dried-up riverbed, a wagon had been overturned, one wheel spinning useless in the air. 2 men crouched behind it, rifles braced, their grins sharp and wolfish. On the ground between them lay a woman, pale dress torn, one arm bleeding. She kicked at the dust as one outlaw bent to grab her, the other laughing as if the whole thing were a stage play. Eli didn't shout. He drew his revolver mid-gallop, its iron weight familiar, and fired once. The nearer man jerked back, clutching his shoulder with a cry that echoed off the canyon wall. The other swung his rifle toward the rider, but the bay leapt sideways at Eli's squeeze, hooves cutting the ground. Eli's second shot caught the rifle barrel, knocking it wide. The outlaw cursed, staggered back, and reached for a knife instead. Eli slid from the saddle in a motion smooth as water, boots hitting ground with a thud that promised finality. His gaze fixed steady, his jaw hard. The knife-wielding outlaw hesitated at that calmness, then lunged anyway. Steel flashed. Eli sidestepped, seized the man's wrist, twisted. A sickening crack followed by a howl. The knife fell. Eli shoved him down, boot on his chest, revolver barrel pressing against a brow beaded with sweat. "Run," Eli said, voice low as gravel. The man didn't wait to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and bolted, dragging his wounded partner with him, both stumbling through brush until they vanished into heat shimmer. Eli didn't give chase. His revolver dropped to his side, though his eyes stayed cold a moment longer before softening toward the wagon. The woman pushed herself up, breath ragged, blood streaking her sleeve. Her face was dirt-streaked, but her eyes burned with something fiercer than fear. Survival had its own fire. She tried to stand, wavered, then sank back to her knees. Eli crossed the space between them in measured steps, holstered his weapon, and crouched. "You hurt bad?" he asked. She shook her head once, stubborn. "Just a scrape." The truth leaked from the crimson soaking her sleeve, but she pressed her jaw tight, unwilling to show weakness. Eli pulled a kerchief from his coat, tore it clean in two with steady hands, and bound her arm. She flinched when the cloth tightened, hissed through her teeth, then gave him a look that was half gratitude, half defiance. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes scanning him as though weighing the risk. Finally, she said, "Clara." Eli nodded once. "Can you walk, Clara?" She tested her legs, rose unsteadily. He offered an arm. For a moment she refused it, pride flashing, but then her knees betrayed her and she caught his sleeve with reluctant fingers. His arm steadied her like an iron post. The overturned wagon groaned in the wind, one wheel still creaking. Scattered goods, flour torn open, grain spilling like pale sand, were evidence enough of the ambush. Eli studied the mess, then turned his gaze back to Clara. "They'll come back," he said, quiet but certain. Her lips pressed thin. "Then we'd best not be here when they do." Something in her tone, a hint of steel beneath weariness, caught him. She wasn't just a victim waiting to be saved. She had grit under all that dust and blood. Eli respected that without words. He led her to his horse, lifted her carefully into the saddle. She winced but set her jaw, sitting tall despite the pain. Eli took the reins, walking beside, scanning the horizon with a hunter's patience. The land smelled of sage and smoke, and far away thunder muttered like a warning. Neither spoke for a while. Their silence wasn't empty, but thick with thought, with questions neither was ready to ask. Dust swirled around their boots and hooves, the desert stretching endless, and the sun sank lower, painting the sky a bruised violet. At last, Clara broke the hush. "Why'd you stop? Could've ridden on." Eli didn't look up. "Could've. Didn't." She studied him a moment, then gave a short laugh, humor cutting through exhaustion. "Not much for words, are you?" "Words don't stop bullets," he replied, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched toward something like a smile. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and darkening, yet their steps matched in rhythm. The danger wasn't gone, only delayed. But in that shared silence, a fragile thread had been tied between them, thin as spider silk, yet strong enough to hold. And somewhere, back in the scrub where shadows deepened, laughter carried again on the wind, cruel and promising return. The night would not be quiet for long. The moon rose pale and watchful as Eli guided Clara off the open trail and toward a ridge where cottonwoods leaned against the wind. The branches rattled like bones, but there was shelter beneath them, and a spring that whispered faintly through stone. Eli tethered the horse, then helped Clara down, her weight light but trembling. She refused to collapse, though her face shone with exhaustion. He admired that, though he didn't say it. He built a fire with practiced movements, each spark coaxed with care until flames licked upward and cast gold across the clearing. Clara sat near the fire, cradling her wounded arm. She kept her chin lifted, eyes wary as if waiting for questions he hadn't asked yet. Eli noticed the way her gaze flickered at the shadows beyond the firelight, checking each sound like prey that had learned to listen for predators. He handed her a tin cup of water drawn from the spring. She accepted it with a small nod, sipping slow, the coolness easing her cracked lips. "You ride well," she said at last, voice roughened but carrying a hint of wry humor. "Like you were born in that saddle." "Born nowhere else worth mention," Eli replied, pulling off his coat and laying it across her shoulders. The gesture startled her more than his gunfire earlier. She clutched the coat, frowning as if she hadn't been offered warmth in a long time. They ate what little he carried, jerky torn in strips, hard bread softened by the steam of the fire. She chewed quietly, sometimes pausing as though the act of eating felt foreign. He didn't press her with questions, only watched the fire dance in her eyes. Trust wasn't earned by interrogation. It was built in silence, in gestures like a coat or a cup of water. The night deepened, the sky a quilt of stars so sharp they seemed carved. Coyotes called somewhere distant, their howls weaving a wild hymn that stirred both unease and comfort. Clara listened, tilting her head, her lips pressing into something between a smile and a grimace. "Sounds like laughter," she murmured. "Mocking, almost." "Coyotes don't mock," Eli said. "They warn." His words carried weight, and she seemed to understand, because her gaze dropped back to the fire, shadows painting her face with long strokes. He studied her then, not with hunger or pity but with the quiet care of a man who wanted to know if someone would endure. She had grit, he'd seen it when she tried to stand with a bleeding arm. But grit came at a price, and the price showed in the way her shoulders curled inward when she thought no one was looking. She broke the silence again. "Those men. They weren't the first." The words came out raw, stripped of defense. She stopped there, clamping her mouth as though she'd already said too much. Eli didn't prod. He only shifted the firewood, letting the flames spit and crack. "They won't be the last either," he said. "But we'll be ready." The word "we" made her glance at him sharply. Her lips parted as if to argue, then closed. Something softened in her expression, faint but unmistakable, like frost easing in sunlight. She pulled his coat tighter, breathing in the smell of dust and leather that clung to it. Time moved slow around the fire. The wind carried scents of sage and ash. Clara's eyelids drooped, her body swaying with weariness. Eli noticed but said nothing, only fed the flames until they glowed steady. When she finally let her head rest against the coat's collar, sleep catching her unguarded, he sat watch, revolver resting loose across his knees. Hours slipped by. The night grew colder, the wind sharper. A sound stirred him, a twig snapping at the edge of the dark. His hand tightened on the revolver, his body still as stone. A shape loomed for a moment in the brush, then vanished with a rustle. A deer, perhaps, or something less harmless. He stayed ready, eyes cutting through the dark, until the sounds faded and only the fire remained. When Clara stirred awake near dawn, she found him still upright, shadowed eyes fixed on the horizon where pink light spread. She studied him quietly, as though the sight of a man who'd kept watch was rarer than safety itself. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Didn't need to," he answered. "You'll fall over your boots one day, thinking that way." He allowed a faint smile, though it barely reached his eyes. "One day ain't today." She laughed softly, a sound almost too fragile for the wild. Then her face grew serious, eyes narrowing toward the trail beyond the ridge. "They'll come back for me. Men like that don't leave things undone." Eli followed her gaze, the dawn showing a land endless and cruel, but beautiful in its severity. He holstered his revolver and rose to his feet, towering against the sky. "Then let them come," he said. "We'll be waiting." The fire cracked, the sun broke clean over the horizon, and in that moment the fragile alliance between them hardened into something unspoken but undeniable. The danger still stalked the edges of their world, but so did resolve. And for the first time since the wagon fell, Clara's shoulders straightened not in fear but in readiness, as though she had borrowed a piece of Eli's certainty. The trail ahead was long, and the shadows that chased them carried teeth. Yet in the warmth of fading firelight and the rising sun, it felt possible that survival might grow into something more. The sun climbed higher as they moved off the ridge, the world painted in hard gold. Clara rode the bay with a stiffness born of pain, though she kept her chin raised, refusing to show how the wound gnawed at her strength. Eli walked beside, steady as stone, his eyes cutting across every rise and hollow. The silence between them stretched long, yet it was not empty. It carried the weight of unsaid things, as if both knew the road ahead demanded truth, sooner or later. By midday, they reached a small town clinging to the edge of nowhere. The place looked like it had been built in a hurry, then forgotten. 2 rows of crooked buildings, a saloon with peeling paint, a store with shuttered windows, and a church whose bell hung rusted and still. Dust swirled through the empty street, and the few souls present watched with suspicion sharp enough to cut. Clara's shoulders tightened as their eyes followed her. Eli noticed and kept his pace even, hand close to his revolver but not touching it. They dismounted at the store, its door creaking like an old man's sigh. Inside smelled of flour and leather, shelves lined with tins and rope. A wiry shopkeeper eyed them, his gaze lingering on Clara's torn dress before flicking to Eli. "You stirred up trouble?" the man asked, tone flat as the counter he leaned on. Eli didn't answer. Clara lifted her chin, voice clear though her arm trembled against the bandage. "We'll pay. Just flour, bandages, maybe some whiskey if you've got it." The shopkeeper chuckled, not kindly. "Whiskey's for drinking, not for your fancy wounds. But I'll fetch what I have." As he shuffled off, Clara leaned against the counter, her breath shallow. Eli stood close, scanning the window where sunlight sliced in. When she spoke again, her words came low, meant only for him. "That wasn't the first ambush. Not for me." Eli's eyes shifted toward her, expression unreadable. "They've followed me before," she continued, fingers tightening on the counter. "Different men, but the same hunger. I was promised work in Kansas, ended up cleaning tables in a saloon where promises went to rot. One man owned the place. Owned everything, really. Called himself Vance." Her lips twisted on the name, as if spitting poison. "When I left, he sent dogs after me. Those men yesterday weren't strangers. They were his." The words hung heavy, sinking into the silence between them. Eli said nothing for a moment, his jaw tightening like a noose drawn taut. The shopkeeper returned with a bundle, setting it down with a thud. "Careful how long you stay," he muttered. "Word travels faster than horses. Folks are already talking." His eyes flicked toward Clara with something between pity and warning. Eli laid down coins without counting, gathered the supplies, and led Clara back into the sunlight. The street seemed sharper now, every shadow too deep, every door too slightly ajar. Clara wrapped the coat tighter around her, as though bracing for something she already felt coming. They rode out of town with the bay carrying them both this time, Eli's arm steadying her as she leaned against him. The land opened wide again, but the air carried an unease that no horizon could swallow. By evening, clouds gathered, dark and heavy, rolling in from the west. The scent of rain clung to the wind. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack, its roof sagging but walls still strong. Eli built a fire in the hearth, the light pushing back shadows that crawled over the boards. Clara sat close, bandage replaced with steady hands, and when she finally spoke, her voice shook less from fear than from anger. "I wanted to believe I could walk away," she said, staring at the flames. "That leaving meant freedom. But men like Vance don't forgive debts they never had the right to claim." She glanced at him, eyes sharp now. "He'll come. He'll send more. And if you're wise, you'll leave me here." Eli looked at her for a long moment. The firelight etched the lines of his face, shadows cutting across the hardness of his features. Finally, he shook his head once. "Not leaving." Her breath caught, part protest, part something else. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I know enough," Eli said. "Seen men like him before. Seen what happens if you run alone." His tone wasn't gentle, but it carried certainty like iron. For the first time, Clara's gaze faltered. She dropped her eyes to the fire, fingers twisting the edge of the coat around her. A silence grew, filled only by the sound of rain beginning to patter on the roof. When thunder cracked, it felt like an omen. Clara flinched, though she covered it quickly with a laugh brittle as glass. "Guess the sky's warning us too." "Or giving us cover," Eli replied, listening to the storm build. The rain drummed harder, drowning the night in noise that was both comforting and dangerous. Clara leaned back against the wall, her body easing despite the tension in her words. "You don't talk much," she murmured. "Plenty of talkers out there," Eli said. "Few worth listening to." That pulled a smile from her, soft and weary but real. It lingered even as her eyes closed, sleep tugging her into fragile rest. Eli sat watch, the storm outside cloaking the land in darkness, his thoughts sharpening like the knife at his belt. Somewhere beyond the rain, men were riding. He could feel it. And when they came, there would be no more running. The storm broke in the deepest part of night, rain lashing the shack's roof like a drumbeat of war. Eli heard more than thunder in that rhythm. Beneath the storm's roar, hoofbeats thudded faintly, drawing closer, steady and merciless. He rose from his chair by the fire, revolver already in hand. Clara stirred at the change in his posture, eyes snapping open, instinct honed by fear. She didn't need him to speak, she knew. "They've found us," she whispered, clutching his coat tighter around her shoulders. Eli nodded once, gaze fixed on the window where lightning split the sky. Figures on horseback flickered into view, dark shapes against darker rain. 5 at least, maybe more. They moved with the certainty of men who believed the night belonged to them. At their center rode a man taller than the rest, hat brim low, coat snapping with each gust. Even from the shack, Clara recognized him. Her lips shaped the name like a curse. Vance. Her body went rigid, trembling not from cold but memory. Eli's hand brushed her shoulder, grounding her. "Stay low," he said, voice steady as bedrock. The riders dismounted, boots sinking in mud, laughter cutting jagged through the rain. They spoke with the carelessness of wolves sure of the kill. A fist pounded on the shack door, then a voice rang out, smooth and cruel. "Clara, darling, you run far, but not far enough. Come out now, and maybe the man beside you lives to see daylight." Her face twisted, caught between rage and dread. Eli's eyes stayed on the door, calm but coiled. He moved her toward the far corner, then stepped forward, revolver ready. The firelight flickered over him, a figure carved from shadow and resolve. "Don't answer," he told her. "Not their game tonight." The door shuddered under a kick, wood splintering. Eli waited until the second kick cracked it wider, then fired once through the gap. A howl followed, the storm swallowing the sound of a body crashing into mud. Shouts rose, curses flying, then bullets hammered the walls, wood bursting in splinters. Clara ducked low, heart pounding, while Eli moved with deadly patience, shifting from window to door, firing in measured rhythm. Thunder rolled, mingling with gunfire. One outlaw fell near the fence, another staggered back, clutching his chest. But there were too many, their shadows circling like vultures. Vance's voice cut through the chaos, calm as ever. "You think one man can stop the tide? Hand her over, cowboy. She ain't yours to keep." Eli reloaded with swift precision, rain dripping through the roof onto his hat. His reply was iron. "She ain't yours either." The storm howled, and in the pause after, Clara felt something shift inside her. For years, fear had chained her tongue. But now, with Eli's words slicing the night, courage stirred like fire catching dry grass. She crawled to his side, her uninjured hand gripping a rifle propped near the wall. He glanced at her, and though his frown carried warning, he didn't push her back. Instead, he gave a short nod, a warrior's acknowledgement. When the outlaws charged the shack, lightning turned the world to white. Eli and Clara fired side by side, muzzle flashes sparking like stars. Men fell, cries drowned in rain. The shack shook under the assault, but its walls held, and so did the two within. At last, silence fell, broken only by the hiss of rain on hot barrels. Then came slow, deliberate steps. Vance himself pushed through the broken door, revolver gleaming. His face was sharp, handsome in a way that made cruelty look polished. He tipped his hat slightly, mocking. "Brave of you, Eli. Foolish, too." His eyes slid to Clara, smile curling. "And you, sweetheart, still think you can run?" Clara's breath caught, anger clawing through her chest. Eli stepped forward, body a shield, revolver raised. The two men faced each other across firelight and ruin, storm rattling the walls like a drumroll. "You don't walk out," Vance said, almost kindly. "Neither do you," Eli answered. The moment stretched thin as a blade. Then Vance fired. The shot cracked, grazing Eli's side, but he didn't falter. His return shot struck true, slamming Vance back against the doorframe. For a heartbeat, the outlaw leader stood, disbelief etched on his face, then crumpled into mud and firelight. The storm's fury seemed to ebb with him, rain easing to a steady patter. The remaining outlaws scattered, their courage gone with their master. Silence filled the shack, heavy but alive. Clara lowered the rifle, breath ragged, eyes wide on Eli. He pressed a hand to his side, blood seeping through, but his stance held. She crossed to him, catching his arm, voice breaking. "You're hurt." "I've been worse," he said, a flicker of dry humor softening the edges. Her hand lingered on his sleeve, gripped tight, not from fear but from something deeper. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw more than the stoic rider who had saved her. She saw the man who had chosen not to leave, even when every reason told him to. The fire crackled low, smoke curling into dawn. Clara straightened, shoulders no longer bowed. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, the shadow broken. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the land washed clean. Inside, two figures stood close, battered but unbroken, bound by a thread forged in fire and fear. Clara met Eli's eyes, voice steady. "Wherever the trail leads, we ride it together." He gave a single nod, simple and absolute. And as the first light of morning spilled through the shattered doorway, it painted them not as fugitives or victims, but as something stronger, two souls who had stared down darkness and chosen each other in the wreckage.